All right, so with everything back on the table, we're going to start and go in reverse order. And so we got our carbs over here. This is the right side facing this way, so rear and front. And now what we got to do is reinstall these guys. And so there's an orientation like we talked about, a little hole on the side right there. If you look down in the throat, then that hole is right here. And so what we got to do is make sure we line up the hole with the little hole over here. So it goes around this way, like on that side. But what we first had to do is take the O-rings off. So I've replaced those out with some O-rings from the O-ring assortment here. And you got to get pretty close to it because it's a tight fit. And so what I want to do is put this guy down in there, making sure I got the hole lined up to the hole that's right down inside the inside there. You'll see it when you're looking at it. And that way we get our airflow and our fuel flow right. So we just slip that guy down in there, and the first O-ring goes in pretty easy, so you can pop it in. That second O-ring doesn't want to go in, and this has got to be down flush. So in order to get that second one to pop in there, you can get it a little ways, but if you see it sticking up right here, don't tighten it up because it's going to break it. So what we got to do is get that flush down into that surface, and a lot of times it won't go in there very easy because of that O-ring. And so if I mash it in there with my fingers, you can see I made progress, but it's still not perfectly flat. So what you can do is just get a screwdriver that's real skinny on its end there, slide it down in there to fit, and then what I'm going to do is slide it all the way in and then push, and I'm going to push that other O-ring in. So we just got to push really hard, and we get that O-ring to pop in there. So there we go. So now we got it fully seated. It's smooth right here. And now we can put the screws in. So we'll put the top screws in. There we go. So that one's down. Now we just got to do the other one. So we grab our front one. And we got to get these old O-rings off because they're just like rotten. And so they'll just peel right off there. So we'll get rid of those O-rings. And we got to replace them out with some replacement O-rings. And so if you're wondering the size, actually the metric ones don't want to fit for the kit I got. So this is an SAE kit. And if you look at the size, we're going to be using a 012. So that is a 3/8 ID, 1/2 OD, 1/16 inch section. So I can put that up on the video if you're looking for it. So we get a couple of those little guys right there. Now all we got to do is get them on there. And so you just take them and pop them over. And then run them down here until it hits in the groove. So just put that front one in. And then the second one, when you put it over, it'll jump over the top of that one. And it'll go into the other groove. So there we go. So we got our two new O-rings. Now we just need a little Vaseline to make things slide a little better. Try not to fill up your hole with the Vaseline. So for this carb, the hole is up this way. And so we want to line it up this way with our hole upward. Plop that little guy in there. And there we go. So now while we're at it, let's turn our carbs back around. We'll go ahead and put those two air jets in. And remember, it's the smaller one, so it's the 60 that goes up top. The one that looks just like it goes on the bottom is the bigger one for the fuel. Like that. So we've got our jets in. Now the only thing left up here is the diaphragms and everything. So we'll switch over to the bottom in order to put the bowls back together. Then we'll come back up here, put our mixed needles in, and then we'll work our way. So we got our carbs still oriented the same. Just like that. This is front and this is rear. Now we can start in on the bolt. Alright, so to get the emulsion tube in, all we want to do is slide it in through there, but what I got to do is orient it so that the little catch catches on the slide right there. So you try to get it as oriented as possible around this way, and we're going to slide that back inside of there. Alright, so then it goes back in. Now with it almost in there, we can line it up with the groove and pop it in there. So now we got our emulsion tube back in. We can go ahead and put our washer and our main back on. Let's get our little washer, and this is our main. And that little washer is going to lock everything down for us. There we go. So our main jet's back in. And we do our idle jet. He just goes in the hole. And so now we got to replace out our float needle with our new one. Let's get our float needle out of our package. And there we go. So now we got our new needle and our new thing. And see, it's got a little screen on it. So that's kind of nice. So we just want to give it a little bit of Vaseline. So we can slide that little guy down in there. He goes in there, any orientation you like. And he pushes back down in the hole. Now we've got to put our little lock screw on. There we go. So now he's locked in. So now we're working our way back to the floats. So here's our floats. We're going to change our old needle out right there. So we'll put him over here, and we'll get our new needle and put the little wings inward so it doesn't drag on anything. And then we just need our pin, and so then we set our needle down in there and put a pin in. Get everything to line up properly. There we go. It feels pretty good, and we're going to check the height once we get out to the shop out there. So now we just got to get that little pin pushed over. So I'm going to try to pull it over there like this. Like that right there. Let's get that all done. So now we're in pretty good shape on the bottom end. We still got our little O-ring for our air fuel mix. And so then we put our gasket on. We'll have our gasket go right there. That's gonna be for our bolt. And so let's check our parts table. All of this is pumper. This is that side piece. This little guy we just replaced out. We got the bowl. We got the air fuel mix, and we got that big screw. So we're in pretty good shape. Everything looks like it's in there. We can put our little gasket back on there, and we don't have to use any kind of gasket material for it. We just gotta make sure it's down in there properly. And then we put our clean bowl back on, so it goes with the stinger up inside the hole there. All of our jets are back in. We'll just set him back down on there, and now we just tighten him up. There, we got our bottom end done. So now we can flip up and get some parts on the side. We'll go ahead and put the pumper on. So the hat goes on top, the spring, the two little bolts, and then this little pumper assembly is the first thing that goes back in. So with everything cleaned up, we just want to make sure we don't lose any parts as we drop it back in there. Get it to seat down in there, and then we just gotta get it threaded back, get the thread started back on it. And now we gotta put our spring in and our diaphragm and all of that stuff. So let's get this guy put in there properly. It's got the little needle that pushes See the little needle pushes up and down. Make sure that pushes properly. And then we put our diaphragm on. Make sure it goes down. And then we put our spring on. Make sure that little tab is in there right. And then we put our hat on. And if everything is right, we can squish it down and get the screws to start. So we're running out of parts. All right, so now we're ready to do our air fuel mix needle. So this is our little bitty O-ring that came with the kit. And so I'm going to use it versus this one that's squashed. So it starts out where you put the little O-ring in there. We drop him down in the hole. And you just want to make sure that it's oriented right. You got to get something to make sure it seats down in there. Little tiny screwdriver or something. There we go. So then the washer goes next because it's what protects the O-ring. So you got to throw the washer in there and get him seated properly. Then the spring goes in. That's what rubs against the washer. And so he usually goes in there pretty good by himself. And then finally the mix needle. So for the mix needle, I'm going to add just a little bit of Vaseline to those threads because one of them was janky. And so now we just drop our mix needle in there. And if we did everything right, it should tighten up in there. Alright, so then we're going to do our setting here. Right there is the soft seat. You can see I just barely turn it down. So right around 2 turns is where these carbs were when they came off. So I'm going to go 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2 turns out. And I'll be able to adjust that on the bike. Alright, so then all we like is the up top stuff. So we'll go ahead and put the slides in. And then we can put all our tubing on here in just a little bit. So the slides go back in like this. Remember, it's got a tab on it. And so that tab lines up to the tab slot, which is dictated by the slide. So I put a little bit of oil on this. You could go ahead and lube that a little bit with some Vaseline if you wanted to, just to make sure it's kind of slide free. Don't want to put a lot on there. The gas is going to make that slide right. So then you just put him down in there. And your needle should line up with the emulsion tube. There we go. So now we just gotta make sure we get all of the diaphragm seated down in the groove. And a lot of times these guys have been around a while and they don't want to sit up in that groove. You can see right here, this one's kind of wanting to not cooperate. It keeps popping up over here. So some people use glue, but for me I always try to use something that's not going to be sticky. And so I'll put a little Vaseline in there just to kind of give it something to hold down on. And the Vaseline doesn't hurt the rubber. But the main thing is to make sure it stays perfectly in that little groove as you put the spring and the cap back down. So Vaseline works nice. And as you can see, it's got it held in there for me. So now all I'll do is stick the spring in. That's going to hold the needle in. And then we put our cap back on. And you can see kind of where the marks are for the cap. But he just goes on there like that. And then we're going to put a couple screws on temporarily to hold that cap on. So you want to check it, put it down on there, and make sure it feels nice and snug. And then you can pull it back off and just make sure that that diaphragm is still sitting in the groove. So everything looks good there. So we got that carb pretty much done other than the tubes. So now we just need to repeat all of that for this other carb over here. And then we'll be ready to take it back out there and check it. I'll also check the sink before we get out of here. almost back together. Now all we like is just the hoses and things up top. So I got to take a couple of these screws out, redo them. But everything feels good, the slides feel good. And so we'll get the rest of these hoses put on here. And then we'll be ready to go out and put some fuel in it and see if this thing works. And there we go. So now our carbs are all back together. We're ready to hook up a little fuel. All right, so only a couple more things to check before we throw these back on the bike and see if it'll fire up. So the first one, we want to check our fuel height in the bowl. Make sure we don't have to adjust that needle. Usually these second gens do pretty good. The first gens you got to adjust quite a bit. But we got fuel up in here. So there's fuel up in the bowl. Everything's loaded up. And so now what I got to do is check and see if that fuel level comes up somewhere near this bowl seat right there. And so what we do is we got to get the line cleared out. And so then we're going to just open up the drain and let some fuel in. But then we got to get the bubble out because there's a bubble right here. And so we got to push it backward, push the bubble backward, and get that bubble to get out of there, because the bubble will throw things off. So let's get it so that there's no bubble in there. All right, so then we can pinch it off and drain out that excess gas, because when we push the bubble back, it also pushed fuel up into the thing. So there we go. So now we let it run down. And we see that we are actually pretty good, sitting close to the seam right there. And as I move the line down, the bubble goes up. So you can see the fuel level raises up as I lower it down. And my fuel has come down out of the top up here. So this one looks pretty good. So we'll just spin it around and do the other one. And then the last check we got to do is check the bench sink and just see how close it is to being synced. Alright, so to check the sync on it, the idle position on these is roughly about 2 thousandths gap on the butterfly. And so fortunately, a piece of paper is right about 2 thousandths. And so what I want to do is take that little piece of notebook paper and I'm going to set it up inside of the butterfly, and it should just barely come out. If I close the butterfly down, I should be able to pull it out. Won't be much resistance. And so that feels pretty good. It has a little bit of resistance to it. And then we're going to check the other side and see how close it is. So it's got a little bit of resistance. So that's okay, right about 2 thousandths. Then the way to check is actually just double it over. So that would be 4 thousandths. And as long as you're in between there, you should be pretty close to okay. So if I put doubled up paper in there at 4 thousandths, see, it won't pull out. And so it's caught in there. So I'm somewhere between 2 and 4 thousandths on the gap on that side. And then on this side, put it in there and the paper's stuck in there and it won't pull out. So I'm somewhere between 2 and 4 over there. So that should be close enough that it'll fire up. Then I can sync them on the bike once I get the bike running. And we'll be close enough that we can get everything going on without having any big issues. So we are ready to throw these back on the bike. And I won't show the video on how to reinstall them because there's another one out on the channel that shows how to put these carbs back on and the little trick to getting the boot back on. But we'll be back in a minute once we get all this installed, and we'll see if we can't fire this bike up. Alright, so we got our carbs put back on after the rebuild, and so now we'll fire the bike up, and hopefully she's tuned up and she's gonna run. So a little bit of carb cleaning does a world of wonders for these bikes. So we're in good shape now. We can continue on with our restore, and we're going to get this bike to be a runner. Well, alrighty. Well, thanks for watching.